Elementary music teacher friend, you love what you do, but you might feel unappreciated and, in fact, unseen some days. You may even feel like you're on a music teacher island and just want to connect with other music teachers who can relate to both your struggles and wins when it comes to teaching elementary music. I get you and understand completely the feelings you're having. That's why each and every week, the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast will provide you with solo and guest episodes that will help you realize you're not alone in your music teaching journey. Throughout each episode, my goal is for you to be able to walk away with actionable steps and ideas to help you feel like you're ready to take on the new week with whatever challenges may be thrown your way. Hi, I'm your host, Jessica Peresta, and I'm so glad you're here. Whether you're at home, in your car, in the shower, or wherever else you're listening, grab your cup of coffee or whatever other beverage is nearby and listen in to the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast. Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. I am so excited to be joined by Missy Strong. This is a guest I have been wanting to have on the podcast since the beginning of the podcast. And we are going to talk about building a sense of belonging in the music room, something I am so excited to ask her about and to hear her perspective about. I would love to have you introduce yourself to the listeners today before we get into everything.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the podcast. I don't usually get to say that, so that's kind of fun. So I am an elementary general and choral music teacher here in Southern New Jersey, literally 5 minutes across the bridge from Philly. Though I am originally and proudly from South Florida, where I was born and raised and lived for the first 21 years of my life. I'm a Christian. I'm a Filipino American, cisgender, straight woman, and I also have the privilege of being a wife, a mom, a friend, I hope, and a colleague to some pretty fabulous people. I love reading and traveling and tea and watching movies and dancing and joking around when I shouldn't. And germane to this present conversation, I have kind of a really odd love for talking about music ed at almost any time and in multiple formats, whether it's teaching teachers, teaching grad classes, podcasting, writing books or articles, or presenting, which I have been privileged to do here in the United States, all over, and around the world, which is kind of cool. I have been a general music teacher for 27 years.
Wow.
Which, to translate for some people, means I am old. And that is the end of a little bit about myself.
Okay, first of all, you are not old.
I totally am, but thank you for saying that.
And second of all, I just love that. You have done so much in the world of music education. It's incredible. No, if you guys have not met Missy, she has been a podcaster for, I was listening to your podcast, I believe. You've had two now since before I even started one. So yeah, you presented everything, and I know you teach grad students, you do so much. And so I would love, this wasn't even on the questions I sent you, but how do you, which I'm sure you get asked this a lot.
Oh gosh, how do I do it all?
Full-time teaching load, and then having a family, but then doing all your side gigs you do. Is it just about trying to balance it all on your calendar?
Well, let's see. Here's two things. I believe wholeheartedly in the grace of God. So the grace of God is empowering me to do a lot of things, kind of feels supernatural. But I also am kind of irresponsible and take on too much because I am a classic overachiever. But something I've learned about myself in the pandemic is I'm also very lazy. And so part of me, I either want to be doing everything or I want to do nothing. And that's not just like me being funny. Ask my family. When I come home from work, if I don't have anything to do, I'm literally like, I'm going to put on my pajamas and read in bed in the dark. Please, everyone, leave me alone. So that's one thing, grace of God.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I feel that.
Yes.
A lot.
Yes. And well, it's like, I don't want to be like, oh, it's the grace of God and I do everything well. It's not that. It's, it's the grace of God. And then I'm often overstepping it by like, you're doing like even tonight, I was doing work and my kids, I can hear them yelling up the stairs, Mom, we're eating dinner. I'm like, I know this is so cliche, but 5 more minutes, just give me 5 minutes. So I really have been trying to be better at saying no to things. And that is definitely a thing that we're all saying. Yeah. And I have said it for a long time, but the truth is I am not good at it. And so this year is the first time I feel like I'm actually saying no to real things that I feel compelled to do. But I'm telling myself, you don't need to do that. You don't need to do all the things. You don't need to answer all the questions. You don't need to fix all the situations. So, okay, I'm 53. It's taken a while. And as I'm talking to younger music educators, I really am like, I implore you to learn from my example, to not have that, to learn to ignore this compulsion to do too much. So how do I do it all? Well, I think I have a propensity to want to do a lot of things or nothing. It's either one or the other. And I have to say, and this is the truth, my husband, Jeremy, if it weren't for him, there's no way I could do this. And that's a real thing. So this kind of makes some of the, partners and wives and husbands mad when I say this, but it's the truth. If I had to do all the things that many of my colleagues have to do when they get home from work, I would not be able to do all this. So I'm trying to say this in a way that's just not like super gender stereotyping, but like, let's just say if the expectation is, okay, Missy, you work all day, you come home, you're going to do laundry, cook, do all these things, I would not make it. So Jeremy and I have a great balance. He stays home. He's a musician, a far better musician than I ever could hope to be. He does so much of it. That's awesome. So anyway, I went way too long, but Jeremy is the secret sauce. Like if I could, so when people, for a long time, it didn't hit me when people said that. My first answer was not Jeremy, but when I was doing my dissertation, and teaching full time, and this is before I was a teacher trainer, but I was doing like presentations and I was doing like a church. We were at a big church with a big music program. And I was the director of that. And then I was senior research assistant with Music Together. And I remember like thinking, I can't do this without Jeremy. So without a good partner supporting you and helping in the work, it is not possible to do it. So that's the 45-minute long answer.
No, I was just going to say I can relate to that a lot because I get asked that question a lot too. And I'm not in the classroom anymore, but I have full-time work with different side gigs I'm doing, things like that. But my husband is a huge supporter of mine. And, like we're recording this podcast episode at night and it was just like, okay, it's just tell him what I need. Yeah. And then he is not watching our kids because they're our kids. Yeah. But,
but no, I understand what you mean.
We take the load from each other. And I'm in grad school right now. And it's just, there's a lot going on. But it is about just communicating your expectations. And this is what I need tonight. And then I tell people this too. The man knew what he was getting when he met me. Yeah. When he met me, I had 4 jobs. I was teaching elementary music full time. I accompanied 2 children's choirs in Tulsa, and I taught about 20 to 25 piano students at the studio. And that's just always been my personality. Even in college, I was that person that did full time school and like 900 side accompanying and piano lessons. And I just always, that's just me. I have a hard time slowing down. So when you're saying that, I have a hard time slowing down too. I want to take on all the things, but I'm also an introvert. And so it's funny because when I tell people that, they're like, what? you're a podcaster. What? You talk all the time. But yeah, but then when you do and you exert yourself a lot, eventually it gets to the point where I have to have some quiet time.
Yeah.
Otherwise
I disconnect.
I have to. So
Yeah.
I feel you on that. Okay, so we're going to talk about building a sense of belonging in the music room. And I love this conversation. So just talk to me, first of all, about what does that mean to you? And what does it mean for you specifically with the students you work with and you teach?
Okay, so yeah, belonging in the music room is something I think that's come out of, for me, kind of focusing on this, come out of the path that I'm on, becoming an anti-racist. This is something I've been talking about a lot. I think that when I consider what's happening in the classroom, I think there's a huge, we're missing a huge potential with our students, and that is to authentically connect with them. And after a while, it just occurred to me, what does belonging mean, in the classroom, not just the music classroom, but in education in the classroom. So I've been thinking about this, I think, especially with the issues we've had in the past 5 or 6 years, that have, to be quite honest, been festering in the underbelly of our culture for a couple centuries, if not even longer than that. And in the past 5 or 6 years have been bubbling up more and more in these kind of outward terrible ways. Not to say that there hasn't been things coming out in terrible ways, but it just seems like more and more. And with the proliferation of social media and stuff, we're seeing it more, which has a more immediate impact. So when I think about these things, and it's very important to say, I'm not an expert on, belonging and these things, but just when I think about it, I think that empathy, I've been thinking about this a lot, maybe in the past few months, is seriously lacking in our culture. And so I wanted to start with empathy because I think that empathy, when we have it, truly leads to connection, which leads to belonging. Now, that's not some great thought out thing I've had, but it's just something I'm kind of milling over. So when I start to talk about empathy, I think it's important to distinguish, at least it is for me, what empathy is versus sympathy. And Brene Brown, and this is funny because I never quote Brene Brown. I don't really listen to a lot, but everybody's like, Brene Brown, right? I'm like, I kind of know who she is, but I do know that everybody loves her. So this is me just name dropping a little bit with the Brene Brown. But she has this interesting description or contrast, or comparison and contrast between sympathy and empathy. And she says, sympathy is looking into a well where somebody has fallen, and you kind of look down and you're like, ooh, that's bad. You're recognizing it. But empathy is climbing down into the well with the person, and saying, I know what it's like to be here. And obviously there's a huge difference between these two things. And she goes on to discuss how empathy is a skill that can bring people together. It can help people feel included, and sympathy creates sometimes an uneven power dynamic that can potentially lead to isolation, disconnection. So I don't think sympathy is always a bad thing. We send sympathy cards, but it can be very surface level. But empathy, the ability to feel with someone, I believe, will really help us create more powerful emotional connections. And I've been saying this jokingly in the past, maybe year or so, but I think it's true. This is not scientifically proven, but I believe that if we could get 10% of humans to be 10% more truly empathetic, the whole world would experience an exponential boost in love and kindness, or at least maybe would just be less awful,
Yeah.
So So when I think about empathy, globally, then I tend to kind of bring things to my classroom, because when I want to like change the world, how am I going to do it? I always think we're really privileged in education because we're directly working with the next generation of adults, leaders, So I'm working on building my own sense of empathy, my skills in this area. And I want to guide students as they learn to recognize and hone their skills around empathy in a developmentally appropriate way. So to your question, like, what do I do with students? Not oddly, but one of the first things I try to do is help my students understand something that I think not everybody understands right away. And that's the power of putting ourselves in someone else's shoes. And I think that's one of those things where it's like, it sounds trite, but it's actually incredibly powerful, because I think that as humans, we're masters of our own perspective, right? We tend to kind of project our perspective, and maybe I'm just talking, I'm doing it. I'm projecting my perspective of projecting perspective on other people. But I think it's a real craft to truly imagine what somebody else's perspective is and allow that to kind of infiltrate your thinking and your action. And I think like this is one of the reasons I personally connect so much with the idea of story, whether it's like a movie, a song, a book, a podcast. I learn so much, not only about myself when I read a really great story, but I learn about other people and other places. And story is just incredibly powerful to me. So I have something in my room. So we're getting to a practical thing here. I have this bunch of things we're calling it the pillars of the music room. It's something that I created in tandem with students, but I won't lie, I steer a lot of it. That's the truth. But one of these pillars, so we talk about like these pillars uphold this community we want to build. And that's something I do talk about with students all the time. This is our community. It's not just my classroom, which is how I used to be. I always say I'm a closet authoritarian, but now I'm trying to be more global. So we have these pillars, and one that's really important, that's plastered on the wall, is the music room is a safe place to take a risk and make a mistake. And some people say like, well, how'd you get to that? Like, it makes sense, but how'd you get to that? Well, the truth is, I realized that I couldn't expect students to sing and chant and play and create and move in solo on the regular in my class if they didn't feel safe doing so, or else it would just happen once and we'd be done. So I spent a long time thinking, like, how can I help students feel comfortable making music on their own? And even more, how am I going to help students support and encourage their colleagues in class to do the same? And you know what is so funny and amazing? It was actually incredibly simple. And this I started doing years ago, but basically starting from kindergarten, which is when I first get students at my school, it was very simple. I start by talking about what it feels like to perform, right? To sing by yourself, to chant a rhyme by yourself, to move by yourself. And we say, the way people feel about doing this is as different as people feel, right? Or as different as people are. Some people love it and will be the first people up there to volunteer. Some people might think that's the last thing I would ever want to do. Some people are terrified. Most people are somewhere in between these things. So I say, well, here's the one thing that we know for sure. When we sing by ourselves, when we move by ourselves and people are watching us, it's a very vulnerable place to be. And I say to the kindergartners, imagine you were up here singing a song and you see some of your friends giggling. Now, you might not know why they're giggling. They could be laughing at a joke. They could be laughing at you. They could be laughing, maybe one of them burped, right? But what does it make you feel? And I'm telling you, almost to a kid. I can see it on their faces. Every kid in the room is like, oh, that's bad. And so we just dialogue about this. What does it feel like? And the words are always the same. When I ask them, just give me some words to describe how that would feel for you. Embarrassing, sad, sometimes mad. And we talk a little like, why mad? Well, because it's not polite for someone to laugh while I'm standing up there. So we kind of start that rhetoric. Like, what is it like to be vulnerable? And how can we help each other be vulnerable? So we talk a lot in my classroom about being musical. That's our number one job. Our job here is to be musical, and that encompasses a lot of things. Like, we want to be respectful, we want to have fun, we want to do, but really, I always say they didn't hire me to be the fun teacher. I'm a what teacher? I'm a music teacher. So I'm here to help you tap into your musicality, and we're here to help each other become more musical. And that's one of our first goals, is how can we help our friends be musical when we're being musical together in smaller groups and by ourselves. And then we all agree it can be scary. So we're going to make this a place where we train ourselves. When Jess gets up to sing, even if she makes a mistake, we are going to be, we're going to look at her. And if we accidentally like smile or begin to laugh, we're just going to stop, because that's a natural reaction. It's not wrong to have that feeling for a second of like, right? But just imagine what it's like to be Jess standing up there. And they are so smart. They're so intuitive kids. They also drive me up a wall, but they're lovely. And they say things like, when I say, how can we help Jess? We can be kind. We can encourage her. We can remember that it's hard to stand in front of people. And I'm just telling you that we build a foundation this way. It's not perfect. And there are times when it falls apart and they have that inclination to start laughing. It just happened today. But what's nice is it only takes a second to recenter and just say, let's be thoughtful. Let's think of these pillars. One of the pillars is I am loved and I matter. So I'll say, are we helping Jess? To keep using you as an example. Are we helping Jess to feel like she matters? So you made a mistake laughing at her, just fix it, and she'll extend you grace and you extend her grace, and we'll just keep going on. This is making music in community. And I believe that this is the foundation to create real empathy. And as I said, believe that this empathy builds connection and it fosters belonging. So absolutely. That's my first thing that I have to say. And I'm just talking and talking and talking, which feels odd as a podcaster.
No, I love it. No, I love everything you're saying. And I know that while you're working with music teachers, I'm sure you get these questions a lot of, I'm having a lot of classroom management issues with my students. And I think what you're saying a lot of times is, a lot of times you just don't know what you don't know. And what I'm getting at is a lot of the classroom management issues I know for myself in the classroom, when I focused on relationship building and really starting to have these conversations where it made kiddos think like, oh, you're right, I didn't think about that. It started, like you said, it was not perfect, but things started to improve and they wanted to try harder and they were enjoying making music more versus if you don't ever go over those, if you're just going over the rules and procedures, which those are important, don't get me wrong.
Sure.
But if there's no connecting the students to each other and having a sense of belonging, like you discussed, I think that is sometimes where classroom management issues come into play, because maybe the kids don't understand like proper etiquette and what to do in the music classroom and what the expectations are if you're never discussing those things with them. And so I love that.
Yeah. And I think like what you said is so good. It's like, I think if without context, it's just like how I feel about teaching music. I'm a big believer in, sound before symbol and experience before labeling, right? Because context is so much of learning. And so I could just come in and be like, here are my procedures, here are my rules, here are my things. And to be honest, I did it for many years.
Right.
I could steer a classroom through the power of my personality. Now, not everybody can do that. And I found that out as I worked with student teacher after student teacher. And that's why I changed from thinking like behavior management to build a true community. Yeah. And I think I'm finally starting to learn at my advanced age that this is key, because the research tells us that belonging, even for younger children, is something that they don't just need, they crave it. And they're looking for at least one group affiliation outside of what happens in their home. At least one. Of course, they'd like many. They're looking for a place to belong. Yeah. And if you've ever had this conversation, like with your own students or your own children or somebody else's children, where it's like, you might think in your mind, like, uh-oh, I see like a potentially negative affiliation happening here. You know, like where you see like this child is starting to attach to a group that could be problematic. Yeah. The thing is, they're going to attach to a group. And so my thinking now is, I hope the music room is one of those groups. I want them to come into this music room, no matter what their aptitude is, no matter what their future musical involvement is, whether they never perform in an ensemble, whether they become a professional musician. I want students to feel like when I was in Dr. Strong's music room, I belonged there and I was important and I am musical at my own level. And so there are ways that we can foster real, I think, belonging that can be life-changing for these students. And I think first of all, when you even show your students that you want to do that, that goes a long way in showing them, I think she really cares about me. And that doesn't make everything perfect, right? But I think it just engenders like a reality in your relationship. I'll give you just one example.
Absolutely.
Make it as, like anonymous as I can. Yeah. There's a student who is just one of those students. And I know even just saying that phrase, every teacher listening is like, right? Yes. He's one of those students, a student where many teachers, and I don't blame them. Well, I don't blame them too much, but are like, oh, that kid, right? And I just got on this thing where I was like, I'm going to do everything I can to break through to this kid. He is, we have established what I believe is a real connection. And it's an imperfect connection, but it's a real connection. And that took some work on both of our parts. And the reason I'm bringing this up as an example is just this week, he was in the music room fooling around during the class. And I was frustrated. And part of me thought, dude, like, this is supposed to be like, you're not supposed to do this in my mind. So at the end of the class, I didn't know what to do. I really felt just kind of like a failure for a moment. And I just thought, you know what? This is what a relationship is. And I said, listen, I don't know what's going on. I'm not pleased with the way things were happening today. Do you know what I'm talking about? And he said, yes. And I said, I'd like it to be different, but no matter what, I love you. And I know you love me. And let's just try to be a little bit better next time. So for me, that was a big thing. Because I was like, this is a real relationship that I have with him. And now that sounds weird when I say it like that, but you know what I mean? Like,
no, yeah,
it's a connection. And he was like, he said, music is not my favorite, but I love you. And I know you love me. And I'm going to try to be better next time. And so to me, that was a huge win.
Absolutely.
And so I don't know, that's one small thing that I've done is look at the students who I, to be honest, would normally be like, oh, that kid. Right. And I'm honestly thinking to myself, change your perspective.
Mm.
And that's very simple to say, but hard to do for me.
Yeah. It is hard to do. It is hard to do because
Yes,
you
it is.
want them to, well, you feel like, especially this point of the year, you've said your expectations so many times. They know what to expect, and you have been working on building relationships. So
Yep.
it's almost like in your head, you're thinking at this point, this child or any kiddo that comes in your room should just get it. They should know what to do by now. And there's sometimes it's just not the case, and that is
Yeah,
so frustrating. And it's hard not to take it personally, and it's also hard to be like,
absolutely.
I'm a failure. What am I doing wrong here? But I love that perspective shift. I know somebody
Yep.
listening to this is like, oh my gosh, I can totally relate to that. Everyone can relate to that situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
And,
Yeah.
and it's like what I was also trying to say was I have this kind of catastrophic way of thinking where it's like, okay, here's my experiment.
Mm.
This is just being very honest. So with this kid, it's like, okay, I'm going to just really try to get to know him and forge this relationship. And then I do it and it's going well. And then in one class, it falls apart. And my old tendency would be to be like, well, like I said, that experiment failed. So recently I've created a couple of presentations that kind of center around issues of anti-racism, anti-bias, anti-ableism kind of instruction. And one of the things I talked about was fostering belonging. And if you'd like me to, I can just like read through my list, one of the
Yeah,
lists of like just a few ways to begin to build a foundation for belonging in your classroom.
absolutely. I think that'd be perfect.
Yeah. So I have this list, which I'll just read through, but I do just want to say two things. Number one, it's not a comprehensive list. It's literally just something that I thought out and thought like, what are some practical things that teachers can do to try to start to build this sense of belonging for students in their class. And the second thing is, as a teacher, I totally understand the feeling of, you start to hear a list and you get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So what I would encourage you to do as you listen to this is, first of all, you don't have to do any of it right now. But maybe there's one thing in the list that's like, I think I can do that. I hope you can find one thing. So here are just a couple of things. The first thing I have is tell your story, because students feel closer to and better like teachers when they feel that they are alike. And this is from research. But also Carla Bell, the graceful educator, she was on my podcast and just a wonderful person and teacher. She talked about being vulnerable with students.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you've heard me talking for a long time now. You're not going to be shocked to hear that's easy for me. I've done this like my whole career. I'm just TMI, Dr. Strong. But I've learned there are teachers who are not like that, who don't share personal things, and I don't mean like, inappropriate personal things, but I just mean don't share about their life. So knowing that your vulnerability with students helps them feel more connected to you and therefore more connected to your classroom and what you're doing, that's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
I encourage teachers to capitalize on their right to access student IEPs. I think we are not told about this and might not even know we have the right to it, but that can give us a lot of information. I think it is imperative that in our discussions, when we're making music, when we're talking about music, that we encourage developmentally appropriate, higher level thinking through a lot of questions and discussions with students. And we should aim, as we do this, for very high levels of engagement and challenge in our class. Because this same research about belonging also talks about the fact that it's important to students when they see our commitment to our subject area or areas. Mm-hmm. This is something I think we hear about a lot, but can be difficult, but we have to better learn how to consider student perspective and preference when we are designing instruction. And I think, when I say that, there will be some teachers who are like, of course, Missy, why are you telling us this? And there are some teachers, to be quite honest, who do not think like this. And I used to be one of them. I honestly didn't really think beyond like, this will be fun when I thought about instruction. But when we do this, we are communicating to our students that they are the center of what we are doing. And we give them great joy when we consider what they love as we teach. Here's a big one that I noticed a lot of student teachers with whom I work did not do automatically, and that is considering possible issues that can impede flow in the music classroom proactively, as opposed to reactively. So, for example, I just did a new activity with a game with these, I call them noodle hands, which are like cut pieces of pool noodles because you can't hold hands. And I think I got that idea from Amy Abbott. And I could see the problems beforehand. So I addressed that with the students. Remember, our goal is to be musical. When I put something in your hands, it's understandable that you want to hit something, hit someone.
Yeah.
So before we start, let's talk about what it's going to look like when we use these. And this is not necessarily related to that, but we need to model for our students and guide students into how to use their voice to advocate for themselves and for others in the classroom in a way that works best for the community. So what I mean is like not yell at the teacher, but learn how to speak up for themselves. So one thing that we can do with students is give them the ability to critique us, which is difficult. You see, for me, like I'm like the Fonz for you old people out there, like I could barely say it, where we can say to students, how am I doing? Let them evaluate us, teach them how to do it in a way that's constructive, right? And not just elated to be able to critique the teacher.
Yeah.
And be open to what they actually say to us. So I've started doing this thing where it's like, how am I doing? And it's things like a piece of paper where it's like, today I felt like Dr. Strong did or did not notice me. That's a big one. Today I felt like moving brought me joy, didn't do much for me, made me embarrassed. Like there are ways for them to talk to us about what's happening. And I just want to end by saying something that could be obviously like a whole lecture. We want to build belonging in our classroom by ensuring that what we are doing is culturally relevant to our students, that the repertoire that we choose, the words that we use, the labels that come out of our mouths, positively reflect every student that sits in front of us. I don't know of many things that could foster belonging more than being able as a student to look around and listen and see myself reflected in what's happening in the music room. And I'll end this part by just saying we're doing a lot about, of course, Black History Month. This, as we're recording it, is February. But I am thrilled to say that every class, including kindergarten in my building, knows February is a time for us to celebrate and highlight Black history, but it is not the only time we talk about Black excellence.
Absolutely.
And one thing that brought me so much joy was we were talking about how many amazing, just American Black music artists there are, from a myriad genres and, disciplines. And I saw these kindergartners light up. And this one little boy who I could just see in my head, he was like, Dr. Strong, we talk about, we talk about Black excellence at my house. My dad says Black excellence.
Aww.
Like he seemed so like he couldn't believe that I was saying this same thing. And he's like, we talk about the same things. And I'm like, and I'm so glad. And you're teaching me. And we're going to keep talking about this. He lit up in a way that I had not seen him do, which makes me a little sad because I must not be doing my job great. But that's what we want. We want to foster belonging by making sure that we're reflecting and representing the human beings who are in our classrooms.
Great. That's great.
That's a lot.
Oh, no. I'm taking notes for myself over here. It's so good. You just touched on that about, bring in music your kids love, make it relevant to them. And one way by doing that is about not just teaching Western-based music.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's, unfortunately, in a lot of, I don't know, I went to school in the dinosaur ages, so I don't know what it's like now, but I know that's what I was taught, and it was, that was it. But when I got to my school and I would try to do Alabama Gal, and I had predominantly school of Black children looking at me like, who?
Right. What is this?
They didn't connect with that. And I realized quickly there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
Like using that song in my classroom, but that can't be it.
Yes.
Can't be it. And I remember even back in the day doing these things and talking about it at workshops with other music teachers. And I would get these looks like, you're doing what in your room? You're bringing hip hop in?
I was probably one of those people giving you a look. So you see.
And the reason I did is because I was losing these kids. I was in a situation where there hadn't been music for 7 years, but also on top of that, I knew I needed to connect with them. And I knew I needed to do it kind of quickly because they already didn't really know what a music class was. And I didn't either. Let's be honest. I was fresh out of college. So I'm like, listen, we're all learning together here. Okay.
Right.
But that's hard to do. It's hard to do.
Oh, yes.
Especially when you're not taught in college that you can do that. And like nobody gave you permission.
You're not even, it's not only frowned upon, the implication is doing so is bad for students. And I know because I was one of those people,
right? Because
I was just regurgitating what had been given to me. Now, I'm responsible for that. I'm responsible for what I did. I'm not saying, it's the fault of every person who taught me, but that is, in many conservatories and many undergrad programs, the truth is, Western European classical music or Western European canon is the end all be all. And that is like our great gift to the world, is to teach what sometimes I believe is code talk, quality music, excellent music, with the understanding that means anything outside of that is bad music. And so you are right. One of the ways we can foster belonging is to bring in the music of the students who are in front of us. And that can mean like culturally, right? Like, this is your cultural heritage. This can mean music that you love and connect with. That's modern.
Right.
And these are not just valid ways of teaching music. I believe they are essential ways of teaching music. And again, I am not saying throw out the Western European canon.
Right. Absolutely.
I'm saying we need to change the balance.
Yeah.
That Western canon has wonderful parts to it and has parts that we all need to learn and can benefit from, but not in the ratio I believe we were taught. It should be, which is like 98%. And then every once in a while, bring in a nice fun song from your pop music, And so I have a 100% let that go. It took a while. And now I'm just embracing it and saying, this is how I will light these students' faces up. And help them to remember that they are musical and that they are important and that they are the center of my instruction. I don't always do it well, but I'm learning how to do it more.
And that's the goal, right?
Yeah. I mean, it should be.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And there's no one that's going to be perfect. There's no teacher that's going to be perfect at what they do. And I feel like the main goal is to give yourself grace and to try. And if you're making an effort with your students, they're going to see that and acknowledge that. And that's going to go, you mentioned earlier, it's going to go a long way when you're making an effort to connect with your students and to create a sense of belonging in your classroom. Well, they're also going to notice you making an effort to bring in music they enjoy and that they connect with as well. That's huge. That's huge for relationship building and belonging in the classroom. Can you give a practical example about, I mean, maybe just think back to even like the last couple of weeks of a way you brought in a piece of music that maybe resonated with a student or students that really enjoyed a particular song, how you tied it into a lesson plan. I'm putting you on the spot here.
No, that's okay. I think, this isn't going to be like a completely like some great hip hop song, but this just happened today.
Yeah.
And that is, as part of Black History Month, I'm going through so now we have these, Black musicians from, and I'm focusing on Black American musicians. And I say from a long time ago and from today. And so with the kindergartners again, in first grade, I'm introducing Ella Fitzgerald and we're singing Tisket a Tasket. We're playing the game. I'm showing them a clip of Ella singing it in a black and white movie, which freaks them out. And another kid lit up, went home and brought in a book that she reads with her parents about Ella Fitzgerald. And she was so excited. And what I loved was, this was the best. She actually didn't bring it in to show me. She wanted to show her class, which just meant to me that, and then she did come and tell me, because I think, the teachers were talking with her. She was so excited to hear about Ella Fitzgerald in her class. So she brought it to her class. There was just something cool about, she didn't just bring it right to me and say, Dr. Strong, look, here's a book about Ella Fitzgerald. She read the book to her class. She did all these things. And so that's one practical thing. But one last thing is, I have this big slide that I made. It took me hours because I was trying to show the kids, if I had the time, here are all the Black American musical artists I wish I could teach you about. And that's why I say February is not enough. February is not enough. So I have this slide, all these pictures. I mean, so many. And I tell them, and there's so many that are missing. And today, which is after the Super Bowl, the fourth graders went off because they're like, there's two guys on there who were in the Super Bowl. Aww. So they saw Snoop Dogg and they saw Dr. Dre, who most of them knew, or a lot of them knew Snoop Dogg a little bit. None of them knew who Dr. Dre was. And now they're all about it because they saw it at the Super Bowl.
I love it.
So
awesome.
Those are just some practical, I mean, it's not like they're activities, but we're talking about these musicians.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you for giving those ideas. Those are awesome.
You're welcome.
So we've talked about so much.
Yes, we
Any
have.
other advice about anything you've already talked about today or anything else you want to leave with music teachers listening?
Well, there is one thing I'd like to say that I realized as we were just finishing that last part up real quick. When we're talking about bringing in the music, of your students, making it so students are reflected. And I also like to say, there's this thing about, we provide mirrors so we can reflect students, and windows so that students can look out into a new world. And I've heard this newer one that's like sliding doors. So they're actually involved, right? So like, for example, in my heritage, there's Tinikling, the Filipino dance. And so helping students do that is providing a sliding door. They're not just learning about Tinikling or watching something, they're actually doing it. But I just want to caution everybody. And I always say, I'm not like a vetted Kodai practitioner,
Mm-hmm.
but I have learned the importance in the past few years of doing my due diligence when it comes to what I bring into the classroom. And this might be the hardest practical thing for me, is doing my research on any piece of music, any video that I'm going to bring in. I am learning to vet that repertoire, that game, that activity, and make sure as much as I can, and I will make mistakes, but I just keep getting better at doing my research. And I want to encourage teachers to look for authentic repertoire and activities, not like, oh, here's some great Korean music written by this white guy, right? And so I'll tell you the truth. 10 years ago, if I was like, oh, I need a Korean song, I'm just going to go to J.W. Pepper, look through the thing, Korean. Oh, great exotic world music. Okay, boom,
Yes.
Now. And this just happened to me. I have a huge population of Indian students, and I have been looking for authentic children's music from India, modern or otherwise. I cannot tell you what a struggle I am having. Now, that could just be me. Mm-hmm. But 2 times I came across something, and it's so funny. Now I'm jaded. Like, I see folk songs from India, and for half a second, my teacher's heart is like, yes. And then I'm like, wait a second. And I look, and who is it? A white guy from the 90s.
Yeah.
Wrote it. So we have to do our due diligence. We have to try to bring in and compensate culture bearers when we can. We have to learn from the families who are in our buildings when they're willing to teach us and teach our students. And we just have to do the research. So that's one thing. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I think is a good way to end it is an encouragement to all of us to be gentle and reasonable with ourselves and with our colleagues and with our students, and maybe every other week with our admin. Just kidding. I'm a little hard on the admin and the supervisors, but I think this is true all the time, but especially in the past 2 years, we are going through it. And I can't imagine a better time to remind ourselves that we are human beings who can feel just a whole spectrum of feelings about teaching. Somebody I love dearly was just texting me and said, I do not know how you can stand to talk about music education right now. He's like, I don't like music right now, and I don't like education. I am tired. And I said, I know it doesn't feel like it, but I understand exactly what you're talking about. And that is an entirely valid way to feel. And you are still a music teacher. Mm-hmm. Whether you love teaching in the moment, you hate it, you are somewhere in between, you are a music teacher, and you are so much more than a music teacher. That's just one thing you do. So if you don't love it, it's okay. If you love it, don't feel bad about that. Be gentle and reasonable with yourself and protect your peace. This is something that I'm saying to myself over and over again. And I'll leave you with this. I just presented in Colorado, and shout out to the Colorado people I love. I did, 3 very intense workshops. When the third one was over, I was exhausted. As you know, it's exhausting to do this. It's wonderful, but it is exhausting. And I went back to the hotel room, and my first thing was looking at my email. And I just thought to myself, oh, I should probably start working on this presentation. I should probably answer these 20 emails. I should, I have this class coming up. And I had to physically say, and I'm not good at this, close the laptop. You do not have to answer these things right now. And I'm not lying. It's a struggle for me. But when I did that, I had the best night. And I just said to myself, it's okay. Through the night, I had to say, it's okay. Because I'd be like, maybe if I could just answer this one. Nope. Mm-hmm. So people out there, from a number one overachiever. Protect your peace. It's going to be okay. You can get to that email later. So that's the last thing I think I have to say about that.
Oh, this whole episode, Missy, you have no idea. It's been amazing.
I'm sorry. I feel like
much.
I am talking so much, even for me in that sense.
No, but you have so much to share. And this is amazing. No, amazing. I loved it all. And I know the teachers listening in are getting so much value from this. And so I appreciate your time. I appreciate you coming and sharing your knowledge and just your heart for that matter. And I want you to let everybody know where they can connect with you after they listen in.
Sure. You can come to my house. That's
you're like, please don't do that.
I always make this joke. My family's like, oh yeah, mom's available. She's too available. She's available to everybody except us sometimes. No, my kids, they're actually very good about it. And they like to razz me about it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to connect with people. Obviously I'm a big social media person and I'm not ashamed of it.
Mm-hmm.
I have a Facebook group called Music Ed with Missy. That is a fantastic group of practitioners who I'm just really loving. Same thing, Music Ed with Missy on Instagram, and I'm at Twitter at DocStrong26. That's my first social media, I think. I would really love for people to go listen to the master teachers and thinkers that I have been privileged to interview on the Music Ed Amplified podcast, a platform where I've really tried to commit myself to elevating the voices of BIPOC educators and thinkers and entrepreneurs, because I'm really proud of the work so far. And the feedback that I'm getting from teachers is that they are incredibly challenged. They don't always agree. Many of them do, I'm glad to say.
Mm-hmm.
But I love that when it comes to, I love to just, because I'm a Star Wars nerd, I love to call them Jedi issues. My friend came up with that, my friend Sharon. Justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so I would love for people to go listen to that, because I want them to support these educators. And also, just to say, because it's funny, I have a teacher pay teacher store. That's just something I never thought I would ever say. Music Ed with Missy, and a buy me a coffee thing, a bobber, where I share resources and all that stuff. And a lot of that goes to help the Music Ed Amplified podcast. So
awesome.
That's it.
Awesome. Well, everybody make sure to connect with Missy after this episode. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I've loved this episode so much.
Well, I appreciate it. I thank you for the work that you're doing. And thank you for inviting me here.
Well, hey there. Thank you so much for listening into the Elementary Music Teacher podcast. There is an exclusive Facebook group just for listeners of this podcast and any elementary music teacher called the Elementary Music Teacher Community Facebook group. Come on over and join us there, where we have conversations around the podcast episodes and encourage each other each and every week. And also head to my website, thedomesticmusician.com. I have some free resources there that you can download to help you gain traction in your classroom today, as well as the blog and the membership site and all kinds of other goodies to help you keep going in your music teaching journey. I cannot wait to keep connecting with you and encouraging you and spurring you on in your journey of teaching elementary music. Hang in there, have an amazing week, and I will see you soon.